Hi, I'm Dylan McGrath, Director of Market Development for Private Networks at Keysight Technologies, welcoming you to the inaugural episode of the Private Network Monitor, the podcast focused on all things private network all the time. I'm joined by my colleague, Jagadeesh Dantuluri, General Manager of Keysight's Private Network Business Unit. Hello, Jagadeesh.
Hey Dylan,
How are you?
doing great. Nice to be with you this afternoon.
Nice to be with you as well. All right, so we're going to talk a lot about private networks. And of course, we're going to talk about Keysight's end to end portfolio of solutions covering the entire private network lifecycle. But before we get into that, let's take a step back. Let's talk for a minute about why this is such an exciting time for private networks. Obviously, private networks are nothing new. Organizations have been using them for decades based on wired technologies and some other wireless technologies like Wi Fi and LTE. But 5G, with its high reliability and very low latency, really changes the game for private networks. Why is this such an. How does 5G change the game?
There is a new impetus in the growth of private networks. And also, you are right that the private networks have been there for a long time with Wi Fi as the carrier. And there are a few developments that have happened in the last few years which is basically giving an impetus for the rise of 3GPP based private networks. One of the most important things of that is the liberalization of the spectrum. If you monitor the industry, a few countries in the Western Europe, such as Germany, UK, Denmark, and also a few countries in Asia, such as South Korea and Japan, Australia, they have started allocating dedicated spectrum to the private enterprises, which enables the private enterprises to uh, implement, deploy their own private networks without going to the carriers for spectrum. And we also have CBRS, spectrum allocation in USA, which is also enabling a few private networks in USA. Although having a dedicated spectrum, just like in Germany and in other Western European countries, is a way to go, which enables a much more faster path to the digital transformation. So that is one thing, and of course the new technology or the new technological improvements based on 5G is also enabling new use cases and also new business models. These new use cases, if I may, they would require dedicated coverage or, for example, an ability to use the full capacity, or, for example, a full control of the privacy, security, and also an ability to configure a dedicated or higher QoS based channels. All these things would be possible with private 5G cellular networks, and that's the reason you see a lot of growth in the industry.
Yeah, and all those things obviously are very important to anyone operating a private network. Okay, well, so 5G has support for ultra reliable, low latency communications and time sensitive networking. Both of these are very key for a lot of businesses that want to set up private networks. What are some of the other things about 5G that make it so appealing?
Yeah, for sure. I think I spoke a little bit about the coverage, the connectivity. But if you take a step back, let's compare briefly with the Wi-Fi. One of the biggest drawbacks, if I may, of the Wi-Fi is the lack of seamless handovers from one access point to the other access point. That basically limits the length of the geographical coverage of a private network. And also, Wi Fi is inherently susceptible to interference. Typically, Wi Fi works in the unlicensed bands, and there can be many other devices that are in the similar range, and so that kind of creates interference. Also, the reliability and the stability, and in fact, the security that is provided by the cellular networks, and in fact, the 5G cellular networks um, are much better compared to Wi-Fi, and that's the reason the Wi-Fi is much the 5G based private cellular networks are much better compared to the Wi-Fi based private networks.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things I'd really like to delve into this first installment of the private network monitor is the wide array of industries that are interested in using 5G private networks. I think that a lot of times the most immediate example that comes to mind and the one that we see illustrating the concept frequently is manufacturing and Industry 4.0 type applications. You can easily see where that this technology lends itself so well to a situation like that. But I mean, I know that this is only one of many types of situations where a private network is appropriate and beneficial to the organization. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other industries that are interested in private networks and setting up 5G private networks?
Yeah, absolutely. So you are absolutely right. There is a lot of chatter and talk about private 5G cellular networks in manufacturing, or Industry 4.0. But there are a few other verticals that we are seeing tremendous growth, particularly the smart warehouses, and mining, and then ports, that includes seaports and airports, and also energy sector and utilities. Of course, with CBRS, we're also seeing in other segments that there is some growth, particularly the education sector, and of course, the healthcare sector it will also benefit a lot from the private 5G cellular networks. But you touched a few things. But if I go a little bit more in deep about why these industries are basically implementing the 5G cellular networks, if you think of it, let's start with the manufacturing. The holy grail goal of manufacturing is about, hey, everything on an assembly line must be wireless. Uh, it can be they also may want to use smart robots, wireless robots, mobots, cobots, everything wirelessly, and also have an ability such as adaptive manufacturing. That means change the manufacturing based on the uh, PO that they receive, and also have a closed loop manufacturing wherein the data from the assembly line will be transported to a mobile edge cloud, and an AI based application processes the data and sends back the command to the assembly line to basically indicating what to do next. That is all the growth that people are expecting in smart manufacturing, and we shall see. It's definitely a complicated endeavor, and it may take some time before the industry moves there. But of course, those are not the same use cases in other industries. Um, all these industries, in particularly, the basic thing that they are trying to do is about having a stable connection, a reliable coverage, and which enables some kind of automation in all these industries. Now, if you go into a few other industries that we talked about, let's say mining. Mining is all about having a very reliable and stable connection, and possibly having a video based closed loop monitoring, such that they could monitor throughout the mining what's happening. And if you think of the energy sector, particularly smart grids, it's about having wireless sensors, wireless meters, and everything wireless. And as a use case, let's say something has failed somewhere in the distributed network, and with wireless sensors and wireless connection, the control room would know where exactly the failure has happened, and the truck can be rolled directly to the location where it has failed, which is a little bit more difficult in the current form of implementations. And of course, the energy and utilities, particularly the oil sector, the rigs, having a connection itself is a luxury, and particularly having a wireless connection. And then coming to the smart warehouses, if you can think of it, smart warehouses today, people are slowly implementing the mobots or mobile robots, AGVs, to basically haul the material from one side to the other. But if you think of it, if the warehouse is quite large, a single access point may not cover the full warehouse. And that means if a mobile robot with autonomous mobility started moving from one side of the warehouse to the other side, somewhere in the middle, there may be a break and make of the connection when it is connected with Wi Fi. And with a 5G or a 4G connection, that make and break would not happen, but it would be a seamless handover from one access point to the other access point if need be. In most of the cases in a smart warehouses, a single cellular access point would be good enough to go from one side to the other side. So that means the coverage with cellular based private networks, which would be much better compared to the Wi-Fi, and that's where the impetus to have these cellular networks in the warehouses is coming. And of course, the medical, it's all about connectivity, right? If the patient has some sensor, whatever the health sensor, and if it has a low power cellular connection, it kind of continuously gives the patient data to the central system. So these are some of the use cases and why all these industries are adapting. And I have pretty good confidence that some of these industries would implement more compared to the others, particularly the warehouses, the ports, seaports, and airports, the mining and energy. Manufacturing will come, but it's slowly adapting. It takes some time, particularly because if you talk about why some of these industries may take some longer time, because the expertise that is required to implement these is varied based on which industry that we are talking about. And also the industry regulations are quite different in each of these things. And the country, and it again depends upon the country regulates as well about the spectrum allocation. All these things, based on these things, we see varied developments, but I'm very hopeful that this will develop pretty fast.
Yeah, so you actually see use cases like mining and ports actually adopting these networks sooner than manufacturing overall.
That is correct.
All right, and then you touched on the various use cases that each industry is going to need private networks for. Obviously, they're not using them all for the same thing. I understand that the connected worker is still a very desirable thing and across all these industries. But what are some of the other ways that what are some of the ways that these use cases will vary by industry and how people will use their 5G private network?
Yeah, like you said, a connected worker, which can be a connected iPad, or a connected whatever it is the basic use case. Having a reliable connection to that. But beyond, and that is quite common in all the sectors that we talked about just now. But beyond that, each of the segments that we spoke about have different importance of the secondary use case. For example, um, in the case of, let's say, manufacturing, an asset tracking is quite important beyond having a connection. And then physical security is quite important in the mining, and also in the energy sector. And remote control, let's say as an example of remote controlling a crane, is quite important in the seaports application. And of course, the worker safety is quite important in the energy sector and also in the mining. And if you talk about warehouses, it's all about AGVs, and the AMRs, whether they can enable that or not. People are also talking about predictive maintenance, XR and VR, all those things are coming. But right now, at this moment, the industry is talking about some of the basic use cases, which is about connectivity, the physical security, the monitoring of the assets, and some remote control and automation.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, so now let's move. Let's talk about Keysight's portfolio of solutions for private networks. As we discussed earlier, Keysight has a comprehensive portfolio of test and validation solutions that covers the entire life cycle. You've got the build phase where people are creating the infrastructure and devices, through the plan and deployment phase, all the way to the run phase where people are actually operating the private networks. We're going to discuss all of these phases in various future episodes of this vodcast, but maybe can you walk us through them right a little bit right now at a very high level and talk about the different phases and how Keysight solutions fit in?
Yeah, so you touched base briefly about the phases, but let me expand a little bit on that, and I will also touch base very briefly about Keysight solutions for that. Now, if you think of the whole life cycle, right? Everything starts with, in the case of networks itself, it's about devices and the network. It all starts with doing some research about anything about new technology. Right now, it's about 6G, and it goes through the research and then development of either the devices or the network equipment, and then making sure that those devices are tested and then certified if the certification is needed. So this phase we call as a build phase, and Keysight has a solution portfolio to address the needs in this phase, and what we call it as the private networks, device, and network assurance solutions. And once the devices and the network is ready, um, the stakeholders such as the systems integrators or the operators would take that, and they want to deploy that in the network. Before they deploy in the network, they have to design the network based on the use case requirements, right? Those use case requirements would turn into some network requirements. Based on the network requirements, the network will be designed, and then the network will be deployed. Once the network is deployed, you got to make sure that the the network quality, the performance, the capacity, all those things meet the design requirements. And Keysight has the solutions which we call as the private network deployment solutions. And once the network is deployed, then the last phase, which we call as the run phase. In the run phase, either the operator or the managed solution providers, or maybe the end users, let's say the companies like auto industry or the chemical industry, whoever the companies that deploy these private networks, they would run these networks. And how can one assure that the network that is deployed is meeting the requirements of those end customers or the end users? And is the network keeping up with the quality requirements of the use case for which the network is designed? So Keysight has solutions to continuously monitor the network, um, both from an end device perspective and also from the network perspective, and um, um, give the quality metrics of both the devices and network to the end user by either our own analytics or exporting our KPI metrics into a third party analytics system. Based on that data, with the AI and ML algorithms, one can do predictive analytics to confirm or to basically predict how the network is behaving or would behave in future. So these are the three different solutions that we have for private networks.
All right, terrific, Jagadeesh. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure as always. I look forward to talking with you more as we create more episodes of the Private Network Monitor.
Awesome, Dylan. Nice speaking with you today.